Maybe you've had this happen to you. You're in the market for a new car and you start thinking about what you want to get and you're like, I know what I'm getting. I'm getting a truck. But I'm not just getting any truck, I am gonna get an F-150. So you start your search, you're looking all around, and you end up with this beautiful, brand new, or at least new to you, red F-150, right? And then you're driving down the road and something amazing happens. What do you see? Like a million other red F-150s on the road. And you're like, wait a minute, is today National Red F-150 Day? Like, is that a thing? They should have told me this before I bought the truck. What's going on here? Right, but we know this, right? There's no more red F-150s on the road that day than there were the day before. We are just now open up to seeing something that had always been there. Because our interests changed, our eyes were open up to a world that we didn't even knew existed. Now, this happens to all of us in many different areas, but one of the biggest examples for me of this happening in my life is actually with coffee, believe it or not. If anyone should have had a coffee habit by the age of 10, it was probably me. I was raised by a legendary coffee drinker. I like to think if there was a coffee hall of fame, that my dad would be in it and right next to Juan Valdez. Just a personal thought, right? Just how I think about it. But my dad drank coffee with just about every meal, still does, even the ones we all know you should not drink coffee with. Pizza, cheeseburgers, I know, doesn't stop my dad. He even drinks coffee at the restaurants that we all know only make like one pot of coffee a week. Yeah, doesn't slow him down. Every meal, any meal, large black coffee. Now, I was around it all my life, but I had zero interest in it. And then I turned 30. And then my wife and I, we had our fourth kid. And mornings were all of a sudden no longer something that were, refreshing or something I was looking forward to. A lot of my mornings were now starting with somebody poking me in the face saying, Dad, are you awake yet? Well, yeah, I am now. Thanks, buddy. Yeah. What can I do for you? So it didn't take a genius to think, you know what? I'm gonna give this coffee thing a chance, right? Maybe my dad was onto something. So sure enough, little did I know that this drink wouldn't just become something that would help me, wake up in the mornings. And it wouldn't just be something that would help me, love my kids in the morning. It was actually something that would open up a whole new passion for me, or my wife might say, a bit of an obsession. Any other coffee snobs out here with me today? Yeah. You can tell which ones are the coffee snobs, not just because they raised their hand, but they probably leaned over and explained how I was doing this incorrectly all this whole time. I know, my people. Now, my wife, she loves to drink coffee, has for as long as I've known her, but while she's content to get one of those large 10-pound bags of coffee for like a nickel, I prefer to know the name of the person that grows my beans and how they roast them. Yeah, but the obsession doesn't just end there. I don't just buy better beans, and they are better beans, I promise. I then go through this lovely process that may or may not involve a scale, a kettle, and a very, very specific bean grinder. And to think, it's just this amazing thing. All I have to give up is about an hour or so of sleep each morning to get a great cup of coffee. Whew, that is hotter than I anticipated. Not gonna lie. Oh, but it's good. It's good. You think about it. This drink, something I was around my entire life, but I paid no attention to, is now an everyday part of my life. And sure enough, I see it everywhere I go. Coffee shops, local roasters, new and different ways to brew coffee, it's everywhere. And it's something I look forward to each morning. It's something that I love. Now, I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's not F-150s, maybe you don't drink coffee, but I know this has happened to some of us at some point in our lives. We're going through life and a friend mentions something, an event happens, or maybe even an ad on TV opens up our eyes to seeing something that had always been there, but that we were completely oblivious to. And this reaction that we're having, that we all have, is not unique to us. It's actually how you and I were made. See, we all have something working really hard in our brains right now called the reticular activating system. This is a real thing. I did not make it up for this talk, I promise. You can look it up later, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Your reticular activating system, or RAS, is basically the filter on your brain. It's the portal through which nearly all information enters your brain. And even though you can be exposed to millions of bits of information at any given second, your filter only lets certain things in. Do you know who controls your filter? You do. You might not even know that you do, but you do, and you're doing it right now. There are so many things that you could be paying attention to, but hopefully you're listening to me. Your filter It knows what to let in and what to keep out because you have trained it. Every day, you are telling it what you want in and what you don't. And this entire system, this amazing system, this your reticular activating system is based on one thing and one thing only. It's based on what you focus on. The more you focus on something, the more your filter pays attention to that information. If you don't drink coffee or you don't care about coffee, then your filter won't even bother your brain, the rest of your brain, with information about coffee. But if you tell yourself that you might want to consider drinking coffee, your filter will start to pay attention to what's going on. And all of a sudden, you'll hear this conversation that these two people are having about this amazing cup of coffee that they had at a coffee shop. Your entire life, you could have been around this conversation and you wouldn't even have noticed. But since you changed your filter to start paying attention to coffee, you now notice that it's all over the place. And it seems like people are always talking about it. For all of us, there's lots of things in the world that could help change our lives or at a minimum add value to our lives that we aren't even aware of. And all we have to do is become aware of it or be interested in it, and our brains will start focusing on it. But sometimes we need help with what it is that we need to be aware of. And when you read the accounts of Jesus' life, you see that he was a master at helping people become aware of things that they didn't know were right in front of them or all around them. See, Jesus spoke to people in such a way that their interaction with him contained the possibility of being a before and after moment in their lives. Before, they're not even aware of this thing that Jesus is talking about, but after they're with him, they go away and they could never forget what he had shared. In the New Testament of the Bible, there's a book called Matthew, and in it, there are several examples of Jesus sharing with people in such a way that would cause them to go away and think differently than they ever had before. Here's one of them. In Matthew 5, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." See, even in Jesus' day, everyone listening would agree that murder is bad, that murder is awful. But in order to open up people's eyes to a new way of seeing things, Jesus tells his audience that when you are angry, it's just as bad as murder. Now, was Jesus trying to say that the punishment for murder and anger should be the same thing? Of course not. So what was Jesus doing? Jesus was prioritizing the interior part of people's lives. He was prioritizing the interior part of people's lives. Jesus taught in a way that showed us that he knew that people were not paying attention to the internal part of their lives. Everyone's focus was on the external. They all focused on how they behaved. And people were living as if it didn't matter what they thought or what they felt. They measured themselves and others on their external behaviors. But Jesus helped them see that our external actions are fueled by our internal emotions. Our external actions are fueled by our internal emotions, because our actions are not just actions. They all have a starting point that is inside of us, and inside our minds, or some might say inside of our hearts or inside of our souls, is a thought or a belief or an emotion. And it normally plays itself out in a physical action. So Jesus showed us that if people began paying attention to what was happening on the inside, then it could ultimately lead to change on the outside. Now, when Jesus' listeners went away, these listeners that had just heard him equate murder and anger, when they went away, they had something entirely new to focus on. And focusing on that anger and trying to figure out where that anger was coming from could bring about change in their life. These people that had probably never given a second thought to the fact that they might get angry would have something very different to think about the next time that they were angry. They would have a new thought tied to a familiar emotion. Now, Jesus did this with many other examples, not just with anger. Here's another one later on in Matthew. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said that you should not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone that looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." See, Jesus had a captive audience. He could have just shared a command, don't look at people with lust. And it would have been fine, and everybody would have gone away, and nothing in their lives would have changed. But instead, Jesus, knowing how we're made, knowing how our filters work, he brilliantly found a way to prioritize what was going on the inside, which would hopefully cause people to focus on something different and bring about change in their thinking and in their life. Have you ever tried unsuccessfully to change something in your life? Maybe it's a habit or a behavior. Most of us would say we've struggled with something like this at some point. But here's the thing. If we are willing to focus on the internal, our anger, our lust, our thoughts, our feelings, then we can change how we behave, and we can change what we're known for. We can change who we are. Maybe for some of you, your life has been about what you've done and you haven't paid much attention to what does or doesn't happen on the inside. And if that's you, I would just love it if you went away from today and you just decided to start paying attention to what's happening on the inside. And maybe you discover that there is a world available to you, an entire new world that can help you bring about change in your life. And this might sound crazy, but I would love it if you would invite God into that process with you. Ask him to help you to be aware of what's happening on the inside. And if that sounds weird, and maybe you're here with us today or you're joining us online and you're thinking, I don't know if I believe in God, or you'd say, no, I know that I don't believe in God. I would still say that you can invite God into this with you. And you don't need to believe in God to implement any of this. You can still invite him into this. And if he isn't real, you haven't lost anything by asking. But if God is real, if he's real, who knows? Maybe you could have your eyes opened up to a whole new world that you never even knew existed. Now, for some of you, you may not have thought about it in these terms, but you know that you've paid attention to what's going on the inside at some point in your life. And maybe you thought that was a valuable time, but that you put a check in that box and you're like, I am done with that. I don't have to do that anymore. But there's something so important about this topic is the fact that we can never give up on this. This is not a destination. We don't arrive or complete this part of the journey because we can always pay better attention to our emotions. And if you're a Christian, especially if you're a Christian here today, let me just encourage you, there is too much at stake to not take the interior of your life as seriously as Jesus did. Because everyone benefits when we prioritize the interior of our lives, because looking inward is not just about you. It's about you and everyone that you come in contact with. And when you give yourself permission to stop looking inward, you are choosing to make life unnecessarily hard for the people around you. Maybe your anger on the inside is spilling out into your life and it's affecting relationships in ways that you don't want. Maybe your lust has gotten out of control or is about to get out of control and you don't know where to begin. My hope for you and for me today is that we would remember that our external actions are fueled by our internal emotions. And if we choose to focus on what's inside, we can make life better for ourselves and for everyone around us. Thank you.